While a man was relieving himself in the desert, he suddenly caught a glimpse of something on the ground nearby. Out of nowhere, a flash of golden light. Confused, he walked over to check it out. After brushing away the top layer of sand, he found a massive nugget of pure gold. He glanced over at his partner nearby. After going back and forth, he hollered for his partner to come look. His partner's jaw hit the floor. Holy crap, fortune just literally dropped into their laps. To see if it was real gold, his partner whipped out a lighter and held it to the nugget. After holding the flame on it for over half an hour, the gold showed absolutely no change. That meant this was extremely high purity gold. Buzzing with excitement, the two of them grabbed shovels and started digging. After digging for hours straight, they still couldn't reach the bottom of the nugget. Not willing to give up, they tried to yank it out. But even with every ounce of their strength, they couldn't budge it one bit. Turns out this gold was way bigger than they'd imagined. It was practically a small mountain of gold. Next, they tied a rope around the nugget and hooked the other end to a tow hitch. Then they fired up the engine and tried to drag it out. But the gold mountain might as well have been rooted to the earth. It wouldn't move an inch no matter what. After several attempts, every single one came up short. With no other options, the two had no choice but to dig by hand again. After digging for several more hours, they still couldn't see the bottom of the gold mountain. As the sky started to get dark, the wild dogs in the no man's land were not something to mess with. To keep the wild dog pack at bay, the two of them went and gathered some firewood. Sitting by the fire, they fantasized about the lavish life they'd live after selling the gold. But once reality set in, the most urgent thing was getting that gold out of there fast. His partner suggested they split up. One would head to the nearest town to find an excavator, while the other stayed behind to guard the gold. His partner told Nick there was a small town he knew about 2 days' drive to the east. 4 days for the round trip. Add one more day to track down an excavator along the way. That's 5 days total. His partner volunteered himself for the job, claiming he had deep experience navigating the desert. He said he was the obvious choice to watch over the gold. But Nick wasn't having it. This was his gold mountain, he'd found it. He'd die before leaving this spot. Seeing that Nick still wouldn't budge, his partner laid out everything that could go wrong out in the middle of nowhere. Out here, you weren't just dealing with wild animal attacks. There were also brutal weather extremes in the desert. If anyone passed by, you couldn't say a word to them. And you definitely couldn't let anyone see the gold. If food ran out, you'd have to hunt. He urged Nick to think this through carefully. But Nick still wouldn't be moved. Guarding the gold was his job, no question. Seeing Nick had made up his mind, his partner didn't push any further. The next morning, the two divided up the supplies. His partner took most of the water, claiming the engine needed cooling. Before heading out, he tossed Nick a satellite phone, saying that's how they'd stay in touch along the way.
Just think, by the time I get back, we'll be rich as all hell.
With that, his partner drove off in a cloud of dust. In the vast emptiness of the no man's land, Nick was now completely alone. He covered the surface of the gold mountain with sand, then rigged up a simple shade shelter using a tarp. To keep the wild dogs away at night, he gathered some firewood ahead of time. With the fire going, he managed to get through that first night without too much trouble. But the very next morning, he woke up and noticed something glinting in the distance. Wait, was that more gold? Curious, Nick walked over to take a look. Turns out it was just the wreckage of a beat-up old plane. He walked up and looked it over. It was actually a perfect place to take shelter. The insulation inside was surprisingly good too. But he quickly grew restless. From here, he couldn't even see the gold mountain. Desperate to get back to his precious gold, he went ahead and stripped the plane down, dismantling its parts one by one. He then dragged everything back to camp. After some building and rigging, he finally had a shelter. With the gold nugget right there in front of him, he could finally rest easy. He dared to catch a little sleep. But the blazing sun overhead made that nearly impossible. Ground temperatures had reached over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Day after day of this, blisters started forming on his forehead and neck from the relentless sun. Nick stumbled over to the gold mountain, staring at the gleaming gold in front of him. He couldn't hold back anymore. He slammed down with all his might and broke off a chunk. Just as he was debating whether to quit while he was ahead, his partner called on the satellite phone and the news wasn't good. He told Nick that the car engine had overheated. He was stuck at a repair shop getting it fixed. He'd be at least a day late getting back. Nick got on the phone and told him he'd already broken off a piece of the gold. He urged his partner to know when enough was enough. Just that one chunk was already worth a fortune. But his partner was greedy. That wasn't nearly enough for him. He had his eyes on the whole gold mountain. So he told Nick to sit tight and stay put. He'd get back there as fast as he could. Left with no choice, Nick gave in and agreed. But deep into the night, the wild dogs in the desert grew bolder than ever. To stay alive, Nick had no choice but to hold a torch and face them down. He was completely locked in, not daring to slip up for even a second. If those dogs got even the slightest opening, they'd tear him apart and leave nothing behind. After a grueling night of fighting them off, the pack finally retreated with nothing to show for it. Nick desperately wanted to sleep, but after days of brutal sun exposure, his skin was in absolutely terrible shape. The burning pain on his face made sleep impossible. At this point, the only thing keeping him going was the gold sitting right beside him. On top of that, his food supply had run out. Starving, all he had left to survive on was what little water remained. Right then, a white snake came slithering toward him. Starving and desperate, he decided to channel his inner Bear Grylls and lunged forward trying to catch the white snake. But he completely missed. Not only did the snake get away, but he accidentally knocked over his last bit of water in the process. He scrambled desperately to save it, but it was already too late. The next day, Nick went back to the plane wreckage to grab more parts to reinforce his camp. But that's when he suddenly spotted a woman slowly walking toward him in the distance. Spooked, he bolted into the fuselage. He quickly stashed away the gold chunk. Then he walked back out like nothing was going on, playing the part of a wandering scavenger. The woman was puzzled. What was he doing scavenging out here? She kindly offered him some dried snake to eat, but Nick had zero appetite. Seeing that, the woman grabbed her canteen and took loud gulping sips, deliberately making that glug-glug sound. The sound made Nick's throat even drier. The woman could tell Nick was hiding something. She pressed him to come clean. But there was no way Nick was going to mention the gold. He insisted he really was just a poor scavenger. But the woman wasn't buying it for a second. Who in their right mind would scavenge out here in the middle of absolute nowhere? Seeing that Nick refused to tell her the truth, the woman turned and started heading toward Nick's camp. Nick panicked. He ran after her immediately, offering her the plane wreckage as a place to stay. It was a decent shelter, he said. They'd stay out of each other's way. He warned her not to set foot in his camp. After laying down the law, he turned to head back. But the more Nick pushed her away, the more curious the woman got. She was convinced he was hiding something. So she followed him, step for step. Nick was completely fed up. He told her to get lost. She'd regret it if she didn't back off. But the woman didn't flinch for even a second. She kept right on walking, straight toward Nick's camp, watching her get closer and closer to the gold mountain. Nick completely snapped. And then the blow dropped her dead on the spot. After a moment to collect himself, he grabbed the woman's canteen and drank fast to rehydrate. After recovering a bit of strength, Nick dug a hole and buried the woman's body. Right then and there. Then he grabbed the woman's dried snake to fill his stomach. But when he turned around, he found that the body he'd just buried had been dragged back out by the wild dogs. Left with no choice, he first drove the dogs away. To destroy any evidence, he hauled over a pile of firewood. He lit it up and burned the body completely to ash. When it was all done, he stood there staring at the gleaming gold before him. A storm of emotions washed over him. He wondered whether all this wealth was even worth it. The next day, just as Nick had fallen asleep, his partner's call jolted him awake. His partner told him he'd only just now gotten hold of a small excavator. He needed Nick to hold on for 2 more days. As Nick was venting his frustrations, he suddenly looked up and spotted a car passing in the distance. Nick immediately dropped the phone. He thought about leaving with just the gold chunk he had, but looking at the whole gold mountain nearby, he just couldn't bring himself to walk away. In the end, he could only watch helplessly as his lifeline drove away. That evening, as he was gathering firewood, he looked up and froze in terror. A massive sandstorm was rolling straight toward him. Nick absolutely lost it with fear. All he could do was scramble into his makeshift desert hut. But that flimsy shelter he'd thrown together was no match for a sandstorm of that force. In no time, the metal sheets were ripped off and sent flying. With nowhere to go, Nick ran around like a headless chicken. And then, a dead tree came crashing down right on top of him. Nick struggled to pull himself out of the sand. A branch had gone clean through his abdomen. He got to his feet right away and scanned the area for the gold mountain. Once he figured out where it was, he crawled toward it with every last bit of strength he had. He swept away the sand on top. Only when he could finally see the gold did he dare to pass out. When he came to again, Nick gritted his teeth and yanked the branch out of his body. Then he wrapped the wound with a piece of tarp. To stop the bleeding, he used a flint to ignite some dry kindling. He held a can lid over the fire until it was red hot. Then, biting through the pain, he pressed the scorching lid directly onto the wound. The bleeding stopped, but the effort knocked him completely unconscious. Then, in a half-conscious daze, he thought he saw the woman he'd killed. She was pointing a crossbow straight at him. Slowly, Nick started hallucinating. He saw the woman he'd burned to death, giving him water to drink. But a split second later, she transformed into a terrifying phantom rider. And what made things even worse for Nick was that a highly venomous scorpion had crawled right into his open wound. But he was in no condition to deal with that. All he wanted was to get back to his gold mountain. But right then, his partner called on the satellite phone, saying he was almost there. He told Nick to make sure the gold was secured. Nick immediately crawled to the gold mountain and covered the exposed surface back up. Suddenly, the woman appeared before him again. For a moment, Nick was completely disoriented.
You're not hungry?
No.
Let me fix you some food.
Did you not hear me? I said no.
Listen, there's a water hole. I can walk you there.
Go.
You'll die if you don't.
Go!
So you didn't see me, sister?
Go.
It turns out this was the dead woman's twin sister. Luckily, Nick had burned the body to nothing. Not even a trace of bone ash was left. Seeing no sign of her sister anywhere, the woman finally turned and walked away. Relieved, Nick finally drifted off to sleep. When he woke up again, he found fires burning all around him. Turns out the woman had been afraid the wild dogs would tear Nick apart, so she'd lit the fires to keep the dogs away. Snapping back to his senses, he immediately called his partner. But his partner gave him the same old line. Said he'd be there soon. Naive as ever, Nick believed him. But he was running out of time. As the fires around him burned out, the starving wild dog pack finally couldn't hold back anymore. And Nick, completely drained of energy, had nothing left to fight with. He called his partner one more time, clinging to hope. But this time, there was no answer. It was only now that Nick realized this had all been his partner's plan from the very beginning. By the time he figured it out, it was already too late. After a few last desperate struggles, the wild dogs could tell Nick had nothing left. The next second, they all moved in and attacked. All he could do was stare helplessly at the gold mountain in the distance. In the end, he became the dog's next meal. As the camera panned away, on a nearby hillside, his partner was watching it all through a pair of binoculars. From the cigarette butts on the ground and the scattered cans around him, it was clear he'd been sitting up there for days. Only once Nick was definitely dead did the partner bring down the excavator and move in. The entire gold mountain was finally his. But out of nowhere, an arrow came flying and went clean through him. Turns out the woman had never left. She'd been watching from the shadows the whole time, letting them destroy each other. In the end, both men's greed was their downfall. All that massive wealth ended up in someone else's hands. And with that, the film came to a close.